Welcome, welcome.
Howdy, Becky. What you doing?
I'm going to Rhode Island today.
Smallest state in the union,
And
but the biggest ideas.
I know, and we have a powerhouse here. And I'm so excited because we're talking about a lot of my favorite topics today: writing, philanthropy, women in philanthropy, lifting up women in philanthropy. And we have such a powerhouse expert here. It is my delight to introduce Kiersten Marek. She's the editor of Philanthropy Women, and she's going to be talking to us today about giving trends for women in 2021. But I just think her bio is so interesting and impressive. And I just want to give a little bit of background before we dive into this conversation. But she is the founder of Philanthropy Women, and she practices clinical social work, which I love, in Cranston, Rhode Island. And she just writes about how women donors and their allies are advancing social change. And such a poignant topic today in this era when women have so much influence over giving. And I'm just really excited to dive into her expertise. She launched this organization in January of 2017, so happy 4th birthday this month. And she just really wanted to create a new home for women donors to read, understand, and amplify feminist philanthropy. So they've curated over 800 articles. She's got a funder database with over 600 gender equality funder listings. I know
bookmark this, folks.
People are tuning in and they're going to want to get access to that. And they just talk about everything from gender equity across all of our sectors, health and education and arts, and I just say kind of everywhere when you look at the gamut of it. And so I just love that she focuses on amplifying the good work that women do in philanthropy and the power that's in that. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. Kiersten, welcome to We Are for Good podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be here with you.
I would love to know just a little bit about your journey. And anytime I talk to an editor or a writer, I'm curious, the points that got you here and how you got into philanthropy. So can you connect the dots for our listeners?
Sure. I've always been, interested in women's issues. I studied women's studies and British literature at Hunter College in New York City. And so that was always one of my passions. So the personal and political kind of came together for me after going through becoming a social worker. My work as a social worker is very personal because I'm primarily a therapist. But having the political piece was always very important for me. So I had a platform called kmerica.com. It still exists, which I was active on with many friends since 2002. And then in 2014, I started writing for Inside Philanthropy. And that was really critical because I started to see that there were these big pieces of funding that drove this work. And there were particularly these women funders who no one knew about. And I thought, this is something that I'm going to make it my purpose to remedy, because these women show us the way in so many different aspects of how they are managing their lives and their resources. So I kept writing there for about 2.5 years. And then I said, I want my own platform that really highlights this. And so I got some initial support and we launched in 2017, and we've been kind of cruising along ever since. And so that's kind of the backstory there. I do continue to practice clinical social work. So it's not a big moneymaker to write about women's philanthropy. No surprise there, I'm sure. But it is vital. I just think the mission is so important to the future of our social justice movements.
Well, I just love, we have a heart, obviously, for content creators. We're in that game with you. And we just think that is such an important piece of capital these days, is just sharing ideas with people. And so I love that you have dedicated even a part, your side hustle, to making this happen, to spread good ideas. I know we're probably going to lead in and talk to the incredible Mackenzie Scott gift, because I think that's this pinnacle of this moment of women power and philanthropy. But I would love to start the conversation just giving us a little bit of history, maybe giving us some research or maybe the history of how women in philanthropy kind of has gotten to the place that it is today.
Sure. I'd like to kind of start that history. I have been working on a book draft on feminism that includes the philanthropy story. And so this actually got me back to looking at my book draft, and I was like, I've got to get back to this. I sort of let it, put it aside for about a year, but I have actually done a lot of the groundwork. So I'd like to start the story back in 1837.
Oh my gosh.
Right. When actually before Seneca Falls and the first official women's rights conference, there was another conference that was called the First Anti-Slavery Convention of American Women. And it was in 1837. It took place in New York City, and it was wildly successful. I think they had over 140 women come from across the country. And it was open to women of all races. So there were also women of color in this first meeting. So it went so well that then in 1838, they decided to have a second meeting in Philadelphia. And that meeting did not go quite as well. This might bring up a little bit of flashbacks for people to what's happened recently in our country, but a mob surrounded the building where these women were meeting. And the women were so frightened that they decided to lock arms and evacuate the building. And then the mob burned the building to the ground. So for about 10 years, there was this kind of hush over feminism, and stuff was still going on, but people didn't know too much about it. Understandably, there was sort of a traumatizing, I think, of the early movement. But then in 1848, we had Seneca Falls, which was the first official women's rights conference. But not surprisingly, it was very white, because I think there was still that trauma wound from the early experience of being burned to the ground by radicals. So then we're going to flash forward really quick. 1920, women get the vote. So women start to be able to access their rights and to participate in decision making. Then we're going to fast forward again to the 1970s. And then we have the women's movement starting to happen. And, that was very much an on the ground movement of people, but it was also fed by philanthropy. So in 1972, the Ford Foundation started a national fellowship program to encourage research on women's studies. So with just $1 million over 3 years, they sort of laid the groundwork for legitimizing women's studies as a field in academia. And so in the 70s and 80s, other major foundations came on board. Carnegie, Rockefeller, these foundations started to write the checks for these research programs and also for other social programs to advance women and girls. It's estimated between 1972 and 1992 that $36 million was plowed into funding for gender equality. And by 1999, there were over 80 centers on college campuses across the US for women's studies.
Outstanding.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of, where we sort of laid the groundwork, I think, for this to be legitimized. Then it also got more legitimate in the culture at large with the Women's Funding Network, which formed in 1985, the Women Donors Network in 1990. And then when it really got official with philanthropy is in 1997, when the Women's Philanthropy Institute was established, first in Michigan, and then it moved to Indiana in 2004. From there, where we've seen big movement is in 2007, Women Moving Millions was formed by Helen Kelly Hunt and her sister Swanee Hunt. And this really enabled women to make big gifts for gender equality. It brought them together in a network that validated big gifts. So from there, I think we've seen over the past 10 years, this increasingly large gift thing happening for women and girls. The Buffetts, are a good example of that with the Novo Foundation, although now they're sort of dropping back on some of that funding, but they really started with their 90 million commitment. That was another one that really took it to another level. I believe that was in 2016. And then in 2019, we had Melinda Gates, who committed $1 billion to women and girls over 10 years. And now in 2020, we have Mackenzie Scott, who has given over $6 billion this year alone, with a large share of that funding going to women and girls. And it's yet to be determined exactly how much, but I would certainly estimate over 1 billion in just 1 year was committed by Mackenzie Scott to women and girls.
As you walk us through that history, I mean, I just have so many like quotes coming to me, like quotes that we just all know, especially as you're sharing that Philadelphia story, which makes my stomach hurt. Just that thought that those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and that is why history is so important. It's why giving underserved individuals a microphone and a chance to express their ideas and their thoughts and how they can improve the world is so critical. And the Women's March, when was that? 2017, 2018? Mackenzie Scott, Vice President Harris. These are huge movements for women. And I just believe that so much good can come from women linking arms for good. We're hardwired to be empathizers, to look at the crowd and the community and take care of the village. So this is just a really fascinating topic for me. And I would love to hear what trends you're paying attention to right now, particularly around women's giving. Could you share with our listeners some of the giving trends that you're seeing for 2021 and beyond as it relates to just this growing momentum?
Right. Yeah. So, how is philanthropy feeding gender equality across society? I think the overarching thing we know is that when you begin to address women's needs, a whole lot of other related issues become more apparent, and you start to be able to make those connections and articulate those connections. So I'm just going to highlight a few of those to give you a little taste, but there are literally hundreds of ways that you can identify how this is happening. But one way in particular is when a gender lens approach intersects with health policy. So you have examples like Sarah Hackey Bird, who's now the executive director of Women Moving Millions. She spent much of her early career helping to raise the money to get the rape kit backlog addressed and to start to really take action to address sexual assault in our country in a very meaningful way. So that's where we're sort of advancing in policy, I think, to, first it took us a long time to just recognize that sexual assault exists and that it's not really prosecuted. Now that we've recognized that, we're finally starting to do the pieces that will make it possible for us to prosecute. So that's huge. Another example of that intersection with health policy is organizations like the Obama Foundation supporting work globally to end female genital mutilation, because we're finally recognizing that as a practice that violates girls' basic human rights. So again, we knew these things were a problem for a long time, but to actually take action takes years of movement building. And now we are at the point where I think there is more action happening. It's becoming more mainstream. Larger foundations are helping it to get that into the public conversation. So, yeah.
I love that. And it also, to me, underscores the fact that women are such bold and brave individuals. They will go into spaces that many people will not. There are not many people that want to push the agenda of getting rape kits tested or talking about female mutilation. But these are issues that are plaguing society. And if we don't have conversations around them and even create awareness that it exists, then again, history is going to be doomed to repeat itself. I feel like I'm starting to repeat myself. So I think these are great examples. I really appreciate you bringing them up. And I just learned a lot about a lot of things that I didn't know about. So
yeah, I have a couple more. Can I give a couple
keep going. Keep going.
Okay. I think we're seeing more evidence of women donors influencing political leadership. In 2014, the Women Donors Network started a project called Reflective Democracy Campaign that really broke down how male-dominated our leadership is on every level politically. And now organizations have really taken this to a different level by, organizations like She Should Run and Higher Heights got out there and did the work to get women to run. And now we're seeing that there are a record number of women, particularly women of color, making it into government seats. So, then these donors go a step further, and now they've funded a new media site called The 19th, specializing in covering women's politics. So now these women leaders are going to get more political coverage, more mainstream coverage. It's going to be, they have a deal with USA Today to have the 19th articles on the mainstream newspapers of USA Today. So this is how I see them really breaking through and getting more media savvy as well as a big piece of the strategy.
I love that you just brought up the 19th, because we just talked to Susan McPherson earlier, who is one of the angel investors, and we learned about that organization, and it is phenomenal. We're going to add them to our list of people that we want to go and talk to 19th as well. Come on to our podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're great.
Well, Kiersten, we've got a broad listener base, and all of us want to engage women more deeply in our missions and our nonprofits. Can you kind of, share some, maybe these are trends too, of how do you see engagement with women in philanthropic causes happening, in the most dynamic way at organizations today?
One way that I think we see a lot of very dynamic action right now is in the response to COVID related to gender lens giving and gender lens strategies. Because COVID has shown that there is this women's leadership differential. We know that countries like New Zealand that have women at the top of the pyramid are doing better in terms of maintaining public health. And because we also know that women and families are being more heavily impacted by COVID, funders are really starting to create strategies that specifically address that. So, very quickly, we're seeing these very large efforts. I just published about an announcement yesterday. Several countries and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, sort of acting like its own country because it's such a huge foundation, are coming together. They have pledged $20.6 billion in new funding for women's reproductive, maternal, and child health rights, particularly addressing how there's this gap that is being caused by COVID. So, in that way, I really see the gender lens response becoming very mainstream. People are recognizing that the response that centers on women is just better,
I wonder, I think there's a lot of people that are listening right now. And when I think about the ways that we've been taught in development of how to think about women, that women are the decision makers, that women are most likely to leave playing gifts. I just think about kind of all of those stats that you feel like you've just heard over the years. How would you encourage our listeners who are working to engage women and really trying to do it virtually right now? What is the best way to approach them? What is a way that people can reach out during this time of pandemic and engage with their women in a meaningful way and connect them to their philanthropic missions?
Yeah, I think bringing them together with, face-to-face or voice-to-voice kind of convening is more important than we realize. And, when I see and attend myself to meetings where leaders in this area of gender lens come together to talk about strategy, I'm really inspired. I end up leaving usually feeling more confident in my own work and in kind of my own daily life even. So I think that process of just opening up places where we can come together is more possible than ever, as a side effect of COVID. Because of the workaround, we now have to use these virtual platforms, and using those virtual platforms opens us up more easily to different communities, right? People of all social class and people of all racial background can usually access a meeting on their computer at this point. So I think that we have to leverage that in new ways.
And to me, that says, something to me that is true that we say all the time in our company, which is community is everything. Mm-hmm. And when you can bring like-minded individuals together, especially women who are hardwired to care, to want to lean in, to want to lift their voice, to want to encourage someone who says something really great. And I mean, you're right. When you walk away from those sorts of robust discussions where everyone has a seat at the table, everyone's voice is equally as important, I just think incredible things can happen. And by the way, I love that you brought up the countries that are doing COVID really well, because I remember reading that article back in, I don't know if it was May or June of 2020, where it's like, these are the countries that have zero COVID cases. And they were all led by, it was like New Zealand and Iceland and
Germany.
I think that was just near the list, but it's like Taiwan. I can't remember all of them, but it was like women really can do extraordinary things when you pair the heart and the head together from a leadership standpoint. So that's a great example.
Absolutely.
Well, we love the heart and the head, which is why storytelling, we feel like, is such a big part of learning and growth. And I honestly I'm trying to fathom what it's like to curate and be the editor for 800 pieces of content about this topic. I mean, probably every day you're met with a story that's just like a wow moment. But what's a story of philanthropy that has really stuck with you, in light of all of this? I'd love to hear one.
Well, yeah, I know I sort of contemplated this from a lot of angles. And, I'm also a therapist. So I hear a lot of people's real life stories that no one else gets to hear. And so I sort of thought about that, and in my own life. So I have a couple of stories that, happen to both involve waiters and waitresses, which I don't know why. I actually have been a waitress, so maybe that's part of it. But one story, and I think of these as what I would call true gifts. And a true gift, I feel, is one that really comes from your own inspiration internally. As opposed to, yes, my siblings or my, husband gives me a gift for Christmas, so I give him a gift. Yeah, we're inspired, but not that same. So these are my examples. One is, about 10 years ago, when my mom was at the end of her life, one of my sisters came to stay nearby. The two of us kind of managed it together. And then she was here for several months. And while she was here, she went to one restaurant several times a week, just because that was what ended up happening. And she ended up talking a lot with one of the waiters there. And he would ask about how she was doing. And she would tell him about, how she was here to help with my mom. And so after my mom passed, this gentleman came to my mom's funeral.
Oh.
I just thought was so sweet. Like, it was such a true gift. Like, he did not have to do that. He was there because he just genuinely listened to my sister and appreciated what she was doing and showed it to her and to us as a whole family. So that is one story that kind of sticks with me. And then more recently, I just came across another story of someone who was just going a lot to one place, kind of someone who's a little bit socially isolated, I would say, and met someone there who, they just got to have exchanges with one of the waitresses there more frequently. And it occurred to him that he wanted to give a gift to her. So he got a Christmas card and put $300 in it and brought it down to the restaurant and gave it to her. And she just was in tears and telling him, my son is going to have the best Christmas ever. And he was saying, oh, it was the least I could do for you. I know that in COVID, you're not making as much money. And, stories like that, just really, those are the true gifts. Those are the moments where people rise above and they say, I'm going to do something extra special. And I know I'm not going to get anything from it, but I just want to do it.
And being able to see people who think that they're invisible is such a gift in this world. If you are someone who can open your eyes and see everyone, I mean, here, everyone matters. We talk about that all the time. Everyone matters. And I just think that that is a great story. And for anyone that's just listening to it, if you get on our YouTube account, I mean, you just see the vibrancy of Kiersten's face while she's telling that story, because it it just tells me how powerful one person's kindness can be to another person. And that's inspirational, and that's what we want to amplify and raise up. So you've given us a lot of good tips today. And I wonder if, our last question is always, what is your one good thing, something that you could give our audience that they could take with them today?
Yeah. When I came to thinking about this, of course, my therapist rose right to the surface. And I guess the one thing I would say is reflect on your feelings, and be your own best friend. I think we don't recognize how important that piece is in our lives. And maybe you have to find a special way to prompt yourself towards that. I have this little thing I do. I sort of squeeze my middle finger to remind myself if I feel like I need to reflect on my feelings for a little bit. Because when you do that, I think you develop this sense of curiosity about yourself. And rather than judgment, you can come to a place of understanding from which you can advance and really live a better life. So that would be my one thing, is just reflect on your feelings.
Okay, that really resonates with me. And as much as we have loved on women in this discussion, I will say this is something that women are terrible at. And I mean, I will say I am awful
Me too.
at the self-care aspect. I mean, Julie and I are Enneagram 2, so of course we can't ask for help, if our life depended on it. But that was a really good tip, to just create some time for yourself, because we want to grow ourselves. We want to evolve. We want to continue listening to other people. We want to understand someone else's perspective. I look at the world right now and I think we have got to do better at listening to each other and not reacting, and understanding where these things come from. Storytelling is a huge part of that, but self-care is so important. Thank you for saying that.
As much as it's true for women, and women can be not great at it, I do think men really struggle in the category of reflecting on their feelings. And
Watch it. You're right.
Watch it. You're right.
And so I just, I like to put that out there as this part of emotional intelligence that men really can develop. It's true. And when they do, they just naturally come over to the side of lifting women up. So it all comes together.
Okay, Kiersten. So thank you for literally everything that you've said. I feel like you've given me many moments to pause, and I want to go back and reflect on so many of the tidbits you brought today. But I don't want to miss an opportunity for you just to share with our listeners about Philanthropy Women. How can they engage with your content and subscribe and find you online? Can you kind of point us to all the channels that you're on?
Yeah, or any places where they could go to get information to learn more about women in philanthropy.
Yeah.
Sure. So we're at philanthropywomen.org, and we can give you 3 articles a month for free. But after that, we hope you'll subscribe for $9.99 a month. You can also just subscribe to our knowledge base, which, as you mentioned, has over, I think, 650 listings of gender equality funders now. I believe we're the largest funder database in the world for gender equality. I spend time combing these things, because that's how we find the new resources. So for sure, if this is your specialty, looking for money for women and girls, for $4.95 a month, you'll find something valuable in our database. And beyond that, we spend a lot of time just promoting on social media the ideas of gender equality across the culture, particularly on Twitter. So we have a really lively Twitter update that we keep about 11 to 15 tweets a day relating to women and girls and the movement activity across a kind of a widespread span. So if you just want to get some free content, that's a great way to just get into the kind of mindset that we're coming from. And beyond that, we're always looking for that next level. So I have some funders, but not very many. And our real goal is to trend toward being on the, not on the nonprofit market, but being able to be a for-profit product. So I'm actually hoping to reduce donor funding and maybe be able to move into another platform that really wants to take this content mainstream. So that's what I'm kind of looking at for our vision. For now, I don't see that coming down anytime soon. So we're just going to keep going with our platform and keep producing. We produce between 8 and 10 new stories a week. Some of them are just pieces that we're reprinting from press releases because we just don't have the bandwidth to do journalism on every story. But there is just so much information coming out about this sector that we at least, create the posts that get you the information. And then a lot of our stories also do the analysis and the larger picture contextualizing of these new events for giving for women and girls.
And these conversations are only going to get bigger. And again, the snowball is coming down the hill on this issue. And I am very excited that you're in the space. I think this is really important work. Thank you for coming on today and for everything you brought our community. We appreciate it.
We appreciate you, Kiersten.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is a wonderful opportunity.
Have a great day.